The doctor's words echoed in Martha Freeman's head as she walked out of his office into the scorching August heat of Agua Caliente, Arizona, her 38 years suddenly feeling like a lifetime of missed opportunities. 3 different physicians in Tucson had told her the same thing over the past 2 years, their clinical voices delivering the verdict with varying degrees of sympathy. But the message remained unchanged. Her time for bearing children had passed, her body simply too old to carry a baby to term, and she should accept this reality and move forward with her life. Martha stood on the dusty main street in 1883, watching the afternoon sun paint the adobe buildings in shades of amber and gold, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. She had come to this small Arizona town 6 months ago, fleeing the memories of her failed marriage and Saint Louis, hoping the desert air and wide open spaces would help her heal from the double blow of divorce and childlessness. Her ex-husband had left her for a younger woman, someone who could give him the family he wanted, and Martha had taken her inheritance from her late father and headed west, seeking a fresh start in a land where nobody knew her story. The general store she had purchased with her inheritance stood at the end of the street, a modest building with whitewashed walls and a covered porch that provided blessed shade during the hottest parts of the day. Martha had thrown herself into running the business, working from dawn until well past sunset, keeping inventory, ordering supplies, and serving the miners, ranchers, and cowboys who came through Agua Caliente on their way to somewhere else. The work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, but it could not fill the emptiness that had taken root in her chest, the yearning for something she had been told repeatedly she could never have. She walked slowly back toward her store, her simple blue cotton dress clinging to her skin in the heat, her dark hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat that barely kept the relentless sun at bay. Agua Caliente was a hardscrabble town of perhaps 200 souls, most of them men working the nearby copper mines or tending cattle on the surrounding ranches. The town consisted of one main street with a handful of businesses, a small church, and a scattering of houses that seemed to huddle together against the vastness of the desert landscape. Water was precious here, pumped from deep wells that tapped into underground springs, and everything had a dusty, sun-bleached quality that spoke to the harsh realities of desert life. Martha was unlocking her store when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching at a gallop. She turned to see a rider coming hard down the street, his horse lathered with sweat and breathing heavily. The man pulled up in front of her store, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath his worn Stetson hat. His blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, and she noticed the way his jaw was set with determination and something else that looked like worry. "Begging your pardon, madam," he said, his voice rough from dust and exertion. "I need medical supplies, bandages, carbolic acid if you have it, anything that can help with a wound. My partner took a fall from his horse about 5 miles out, broke his leg badly, and I need to get back to him before sundown." Martha pushed her own troubles aside immediately, the practical part of her nature taking over. "Come inside," she said, opening the door and gesturing him in. "I keep a good stock of medical supplies. How bad is the break?" "Bad enough that I could not move him without risking making it worse," the cowboy said, following her into the merciful coolness of the store. "The bone pushed through the skin, and he is losing blood. I got the bleeding mostly stopped with my shirt, but he needs proper care, and I cannot bring him into town alone." Martha moved quickly behind her counter, pulling out a wooden crate and beginning to fill it with supplies. She grabbed rolls of clean bandages, bottles of carbolic acid for cleaning wounds, laudanum for pain, strips of wood that could serve as splints, and clean cotton fabric. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the muscle memory of 6 months of storekeeping guiding her movements. "You will need help getting him back here," she said, not looking up from her work. "How far out did you say? 5 miles?" "About that, yes, madam," the cowboy replied. He was watching her with those intense blue eyes, and she could sense his desperation and fear for his friend. "I can pay for the supplies, and I will pay handsomely for anyone willing to come help me bring him in. The doctor in town, maybe?" Martha shook her head. "Dr. Patterson left yesterday for Tucson. His daughter took ill, and he will not be back for at least a week." She made a decision then, one that surprised her even as she spoke the words. "I will come with you. I have some experience with nursing. My mother was a midwife back in Missouri, and I assisted her for years before I married. I know how to set a bone and dress a wound properly." The cowboy's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Madam, that is mighty generous, but it is rough country, and the sun will be setting in a few hours. I cannot ask a lady to ride out into the desert with a stranger." "You are not asking, I am offering," Martha said firmly, closing the crate and looking him square in the eye. "Your friend needs help, and I am the closest thing to medical care available in this town right now. I can ride, I can handle rough country, and I am not afraid of hard work. Now, do you want to stand here arguing with me, or do you want to save your partner's life?" A slow smile crossed the cowboy's face, transforming his worried expression into something warmer and more hopeful. "Yes, madam," he said. "I would be grateful for your help. My name is Preston Rourke, and my partner is Charlie Dawson. We work for the Triple Bar Ranch, about 20 miles north of here." "Martha Freeman," she replied, extending her hand. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with ropes and tools and the daily demands of ranch life. She felt a small jolt at the contact, a spark of something she had not felt in a very long time, but she pushed it aside. This was about helping someone in need, nothing more. She closed up the store quickly, scribbling a note to hang on the door, explaining her absence, and then went to the small stable behind the building where she kept her mare, a sturdy bay named Rosie that she had purchased shortly after arriving in Agua Caliente. Preston helped her saddle the horse without being asked, his movements efficient and respectful, and within 15 minutes they were riding out of town, the supply crate secured to Preston's saddle. The desert landscape stretched out around them in shades of tan, brown, and dusty green, punctuated by saguaro cacti that stood like sentinels against the brilliant blue sky. The heat was oppressive, but Martha had learned to cope with it during her months in Arizona, and she kept pace with Preston as they rode northward, following a barely visible trail through the scrubland. He was an excellent rider, she noticed, sitting his horse with the kind of natural ease that spoke to years in the saddle, and he navigated the rough terrain without hesitation. "How long have you worked at the Triple Bar?" Martha asked after they had ridden in silence for a while, wanting to know more about this man who had burst into her day with such urgency. "Going on 5 years now," Preston replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I came out from Texas after my family's ranch went under during a drought. Charlie and I have been partnering up for most of that time. He is a good man, one of the best I have ever known, and seeing him hurt like that nearly killed me." There was real affection in his voice, the bond of men who had worked side by side through difficult and dangerous conditions. Martha understood loyalty like that, even if she had never experienced it herself in quite the same way. "You did the right thing coming for help," she said. "Moving someone with a compound fracture without proper support can cause terrible damage. You might have saved his leg by leaving him and riding for supplies." "I hope you are right," Preston said quietly. "Charlie has a wife and 2 little ones back at the ranch. He cannot afford to lose his leg or his life." They rode on, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in deepening shades of orange and red. Martha felt the familiar ache in her chest return as Preston mentioned Charlie's children, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. There would be time enough for her own sorrows later. Preston led them off the main trail and down into a rocky wash where a few scraggly mesquite trees provided some shade. There, in the shadow of a large boulder, Martha saw a man lying on a bedroll, his face pale and sweating despite the shade. His right leg was wrapped in what looked like a torn shirt, the fabric stained dark with blood, and the awkward angle of the limb made Martha wince inwardly. "Charlie, I am back," Preston called out as they dismounted. "And I brought help. This is Mrs. Freeman from town. She has nursing experience." Charlie Dawson was a stocky man, in his mid-30s with a red beard and pain-clouded brown eyes. He managed a weak smile as Martha approached. "Madam, I am sorry you had to come all the way out here for a clumsy fool like me." "Hush that talk," Martha said briskly, kneeling beside him and opening the supply crate. "Let me see what we are dealing with here." She carefully unwrapped Preston's makeshift bandage, her practiced hands gentle but thorough. The break was indeed bad, the jagged end of the bone visible through torn flesh. But Preston had done a good job of applying pressure to stop the worst of the bleeding. Martha cleaned her hands with carbolic acid, then began the delicate work of cleaning the wound itself, her movements sure and steady despite the gruesome nature of the injury. Charlie groaned through clenched teeth as she worked, and Preston held his friend's shoulders, murmuring words of encouragement. Martha gave Charlie a dose of laudanum to help with the pain, then waited a few minutes for it to take effect, before addressing the break itself. "I need to set this bone before we can move him," she said, looking up at Preston. "It is going to hurt terribly, even with the laudanum. Can you hold him steady?" "Yes, madam," Preston said, positioning himself to brace Charlie's upper body. Martha had assisted her mother with broken bones before, but never one quite this severe. She said a silent prayer, then took hold of Charlie's leg firmly, feeling for the proper alignment of the bone. With one quick, decisive movement, she pulled and rotated, feeling the bone slip back into place with a sickening, grinding sensation. Charlie cried out despite the laudanum, his body going rigid with pain, and then he slumped back against Preston, breathing hard. Working quickly while Charlie was still dazed from pain and medication, Martha splinted the leg with the wooden strips she had brought, binding them tightly with bandages to immobilize the limb. She dressed the wound with carbolic acid to prevent infection, then wrapped the entire leg in clean bandages, making sure everything was secure enough to withstand the journey back to town. "That is the best I can do out here," she said, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead. "We need to get him back to town so I can watch for signs of infection. He will need to stay off that leg completely for at least 6 weeks, probably longer." "You are an angel, Mrs. Freeman," Charlie murmured, his voice slurred from the laudanum. "An absolute angel." Preston was looking at her with something like wonder in his blue eyes. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "I have seen army surgeons work, and you were just as skilled as any of them." Martha felt her cheeks flush with the unexpected praise. "I only did what needed doing," she said, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. "Now, we need to figure out how to transport him. Do you have a wagon nearby?" "No, madam, but the ranch does," Preston said. "If you are willing to stay with Charlie, I can ride back to the Triple Bar and have them send a wagon. It will take a few hours, but it will be smoother than trying to get him on a horse." Martha looked at the sky, noting the sun's position. "Go," she said. "I will stay with him and keep watch. Bring blankets and more water if you can. The temperature will drop once the sun sets." Preston hesitated for just a moment, and Martha saw the internal debate playing across his features. He would be leaving his injured friend and a woman he barely knew alone in the desert as darkness approached, trusting her completely. Then he nodded, decision made. "I will be back as fast as I can," he said. He touched his hat to her, a gesture of respect that felt oddly intimate, and then he was mounting his horse and riding away at a gallop, leaving Martha alone with Charlie in the gathering dusk. She made Charlie as comfortable as possible, giving him water in small sips and checking his bandages regularly for signs of fresh bleeding. As the sun set and the desert cooled, she wrapped him in the blankets from his bedroll and built a small fire from dead mesquite branches, as much for light as for warmth. Charlie drifted in and out of consciousness, the laudanum pulling him into a restless sleep, and Martha sat beside him, keeping watch. The desert night came alive with sounds as darkness fell. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips and howls echoing off the rocks, and Martha heard the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush. She was not afraid exactly, but she was acutely aware of how alone they were, how far from help if something went wrong. She kept the fire burning and Charlie's rifle close at hand, and she waited. It was nearly midnight when she heard the sound of wagon wheels and horses approaching. Preston arrived with a sturdy ranch wagon driven by an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Between the three of them, they managed to lift Charlie carefully into the wagon bed, which had been lined with blankets and hay to cushion the journey. "This is Samuel, the ranch foreman," Preston said, introducing the older man. "He insisted on coming along to help." "Madam, Preston told us what you did," Samuel said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Charlie is like a son to me. I cannot thank you enough." The journey back to Agua Caliente took nearly 3 hours, the wagon moving slowly over the rough ground to avoid jostling Charlie's leg. Martha rode in the back with the injured man, monitoring his condition, while Preston rode ahead with a lantern to help guide the way. Dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. By the time they finally rolled into town, Martha directed them to bring Charlie to her store, where she had a back room that she used for storage and sometimes as living quarters when she worked late. She sent Samuel to wake the minister's wife, who agreed to come help with nursing duties, and together they got Charlie settled on a makeshift bed of blankets. She cleaned and redressed his wound in proper light, relieved to see that the bone appeared to be well set, and there were no immediate signs of infection. Preston had not left her side through any of this, fetching water, holding lanterns, doing whatever she asked without question. It was only after Charlie was resting comfortably, his wife having been sent for and on her way from the ranch, that Preston finally seemed to relax. "I owe you a debt I cannot repay, Mrs. Freeman," he said, standing with her on the front porch of her store as the sun rose fully over Agua Caliente. His face was lined with exhaustion, stubble shadowing his jaw, but those blue eyes were still intense and focused entirely on her. "You saved my friend's leg, maybe his life. If there is ever anything I can do for you, anything at all, you have only to ask." Martha shook her head, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how the events of the past 24 hours had pushed her own troubles to the back of her mind. "I am glad I could help," she said simply. "That is what neighbors do out here, is it not? We help each other survive." "It is more than that," Preston insisted. "What you did took real skill and courage. Most women I know would have fainted at the sight of that bone, but you just rolled up your sleeves and did what needed doing." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I would like to call on you, if you would permit it. To check on Charlie, of course, but also to thank you properly. Maybe take you to dinner at the hotel, if you would be willing." Martha felt her heart skip a beat, a flutter of something she had not felt in years. This man, this cowboy who had ridden into her life with such urgency, was looking at her with something more than gratitude in his eyes. She should say no, she thought. She was too old, too damaged, too used up for anything like courtship or romance. The doctors had made that clear. What could she offer a man like Preston Rourke, who probably wanted a family of his own someday? But the look in his eyes stopped the refusal before it could form on her lips. There was genuine interest there, and respect, and something warm that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in a very long time. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "Once Charlie is out of danger and I know he will recover, I would be pleased to have dinner with you." Preston's tired face broke into a genuine smile, and Martha felt her own lips curving in response. "Then I will hold you to that, Mrs. Freeman," he said. He touched his hat to her one more time, then mounted his horse to head back to the ranch, leaving Martha standing on her porch, watching him ride away as the morning sun warmed the desert air. Charlie Dawson's recovery became the talk of Agua Caliente over the following weeks. His wife Emma arrived from the Triple Bar Ranch within hours of the messenger reaching her. A pretty woman with worry etched deep in her face and 2 small children clinging to her skirts. Martha gave up her back room to the family, insisting they stay in town where she could monitor Charlie's condition, and she moved her own sleeping arrangements to a narrow cot behind the store counter. Preston rode into town every few days, ostensibly to check on his friend, but always finding time to speak with Martha, to help her with heavy lifting in the store, to sit on her porch in the evening when the heat of the day had passed and talk about everything and nothing. She learned that he was 32 years old, originally from a small town outside of San Antonio, and that he had left Texas after his parents died and the ranch was sold to pay their debts. He had spent 3 years drifting from job to job before landing at the Triple Bar, where he had finally found something like a home. "I always thought I would have my own spread someday," he told her one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "Save up enough money to buy some land, build a house, maybe raise some cattle, have a family to fill that house with noise and laughter." Martha felt the familiar ache in her chest at his words, but she kept her voice steady. "That sounds like a good dream," she said. "Are you close to making it happen?" Preston shrugged, his shoulder brushing against hers where they sat side by side on the porch steps. "I have been saving for 5 years, and I have enough now to buy a small piece of land north of here. There is a place I have been looking at, good water, decent grazing, but a ranch is a lot of work for one man, and the house part, the family part, well, that requires finding the right woman." He turned to look at her then, and Martha saw the question in his eyes, the hope, and the hesitation. Her breath caught in her throat, and she had to look away, focusing on the distant mountains instead of his face. "Preston," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things you do not know about me, things that might change how you feel." "Then tell me," he said simply. "I want to know everything about you, Martha Freeman. Where you came from, what brought you to this desert town, what makes you smile and what makes you sad. I have never met a woman like you, strong and capable and kind, and I find myself thinking about you every moment I'm away from here." His words were so honest, so direct, that Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not expected this, had not believed she deserved this, but here it was offered freely by a good man who looked at her like she was something precious. "I was married before," she said, the words coming slowly at first, then faster as she unburdened herself. "Back in St. Louis, my husband and I tried for years to have children, but nothing happened. I saw doctors, took tonics, prayed until my knees were bruised, but my body would not cooperate. Finally, after 8 years of marriage, my husband left me for a younger woman, someone who could give him the family he wanted. The divorce was finalized a year ago, and I came west to start over, to escape the pity and the whispers." She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to continue. "And the doctors, 3 different ones now, have all told me the same thing. I am too old, my body is no longer capable of bearing children. So, you see, Preston, your dream of a house full of noise and laughter, that is not something I can give you. I am 38 years old and barren, and you should find yourself a younger woman who can be a proper wife and mother." The silence that followed her confession felt endless, each second stretching out painfully. Martha kept her eyes on the horizon, unable to bear seeing disappointment or pity in Preston's face. She heard him shift beside her, and then his hand was taking hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Look at me," he said softly, and when she finally turned, she saw no pity in his eyes, only warmth and determination. "Martha, I do not give a damn what some doctors said. I do not care that you were married before or that you are 38 years old. I care about the woman who rode out into the desert with a stranger to save a man's life. I care about the woman who works from dawn to dusk building a life in this hard country. I care about the woman who makes my heart beat faster every time I see her standing on this porch." "But children," Martha protested, her voice breaking. "You said you wanted a family." "I want a family with you," Preston said firmly. "However that looks. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe they were right. But either way, a family is more than just blood and babies. It is about 2 people choosing to build a life together, supporting each other, caring for each other. If we are blessed with children, wonderful. If we are not, then we will fill our lives with other things that matter, other ways to make a difference." Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "You say that now, but what about in 5 years, 10 years, when you look at me and realize what you gave up?" Preston released her hand only to cup her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "In 5 or 10 years, I will look at you and thank God every single day that you said yes when I asked you to marry me." Martha's breath caught. "Preston, we have known each other for less than a month." "I know," he said, and there was that smile again, the one that transformed his whole face. "I know it is fast, and I know I should court you properly for a year or more before asking. But life out here is hard and short, and when you find something real, something worth holding on to, you do not let it slip away. So, I am asking you now, Martha Freeman, will you marry me?" Every rational part of Martha's brain screamed at her to say no, to protect herself from future heartbreak, to send this good man away to find someone younger and more suitable. But her heart, that traitorous organ that had been locked away for so long, had other ideas. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, with more conviction. "Yes, I will marry you." Preston let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby cat and made Martha laugh, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep inside her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Martha let herself sink into the embrace, feeling safe and wanted for the first time in years. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at Agua Caliente, with Charlie Dawson standing as best man, despite still being on crutches, and Emma Dawson as Martha's witness. The ceremony was simple, attended by most of the town, and Preston had scrubbed up nicely in a new black suit that he admitted made him feel like a trussed turkey. Martha wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen that she had sewn herself, with a bouquet of dessert wildflowers that Preston had ridden miles to find. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that Martha felt her heart might burst with the joy of it. The town threw them a small celebration at the hotel, with music from a fiddle player and dancing that lasted into the night. Martha found herself swept up in the happiness of the moment, in the warmth of her new husband's arms, in the realization that she had somehow, impossibly, found a second chance at happiness. Preston had used his savings to purchase the land he had spoken of, 160 acres of rough but beautiful country about 10 miles north of Agua Caliente. There was a creek that ran through the property, fed by springs higher in the mountains, and enough grass to support a small herd of cattle. He had started building a house there, working on weekends and evenings with the help of Charlie and some of the other ranch hands. And though it was not finished, it was far enough along to be livable. Martha sold her store to a young couple newly arrived from California, and she used the proceeds to buy cattle and supplies for their new ranch. She had never imagined herself as a rancher's wife, but she found that she took to the work naturally, her practical nature and strong work ethic serving her well. She learned to ride better, to rope, to help with branding, and all the endless tasks that came with running a small cattle operation. The house Preston built was modest but solid, with 2 bedrooms and a large main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. He built a wide porch across the front, knowing how much Martha loved to sit outside in the evenings, and he carved their initials into the beam above the door before they moved in. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and Martha had never loved a place more. Their first months of marriage were blissfully happy, despite the hard work and long days. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. Preston was a considerate and passionate husband, and Martha discovered depths to her own capacity for desire that she had never known existed. Her previous marriage had been dutiful and passionless, but with Preston, everything felt alive and electric and right. As autumn turned to winter, Martha began to notice changes in her body. She felt more tired than usual, and certain smells that had never bothered her before suddenly made her stomach turn. She dismissed it as the strain of adapting to ranch life, of working harder physically than she ever had before. But when she missed her monthly courses and then missed them again, a tiny seed of impossible hope began to take root in her chest. She said nothing to Preston, terrified that she was imagining things, that her body was simply adjusting to the changes in her life. But when the 3rd month passed and she found herself vomiting into a bucket most mornings, she finally allowed herself to consider the possibility that had seemed so impossible just months before. She waited until Preston rode into Tucson on business, and then she made the journey herself to see a doctor there, someone who did not know her or her history. Dr. Harrington was a young physician, recently trained in the East, and he examined her thoroughly before delivering his verdict with a professional smile. "Mrs. Rourke, you are approximately 3 months pregnant," he said. "Based on your general health and the development I can observe, I expect you will deliver sometime in late May or early June. Congratulations." Martha sat in stunned silence, unable to process the words. "That cannot be right," she finally managed. "I was told by multiple doctors that I could not have children, that my body was too old." Dr. Harrington shrugged. "Medicine is not an exact science, Mrs. Rourke. Sometimes the body surprises us. You are healthy, the pregnancy appears to be developing normally, and I see no reason why you should not carry to term. Of course, at your age, there are additional risks, but many women have healthy babies in their late 30s. You will need to take care of yourself, avoid heavy lifting, and see me regularly for examinations." Martha rode home in a daze, her mind whirling with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. Joy warred with fear, hope battled with disbelief, and underneath it all was the terrifying question of how to tell Preston. What if something went wrong? What if the doctors were right and her body could not sustain the pregnancy? What if she lost the baby and broke both their hearts in the process? But when Preston came home that evening and found her sitting on their porch, still in her riding clothes, staring at nothing, all her carefully prepared speeches fled her mind. "Martha, what is wrong?" he asked, concern immediate in his voice. He knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Are you sick? Did something happen?" "I am pregnant," she blurted out, the words escaping before she could stop them. 3 months along, the doctor in Tucson confirmed it today. Preston went absolutely still, his blue eyes searching her face as if trying to determine whether she was serious. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly. "You mean we are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Martha said, And then the tears came, hot and fast and unstoppable. "I do not understand how it is possible. They all said I could not, that I was too old, that my body would not allow it. But it is happening, Preston, and I am so scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose the baby? What if the doctors were right and I was foolish to hope?" Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. "Nothing is going to go wrong," he said fiercely. "You are strong and healthy, and we are going to get through this together. We will take every precaution, see the doctor as often as necessary, and I will not let you lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Do you hear me, Martha? We are going to have a baby." His certainty, his absolute faith, began to seep into Martha's frightened heart. She pulled back to look at him and saw that his eyes were wet with tears of his own, his face transformed with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, and then he laughed, a sound of pure happiness that made Martha laugh too, through her tears. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. Oh, Martha, this is the most wonderful news in the entire world." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and Martha felt the fear begin to recede, replaced by cautious hope. Maybe, just maybe, this miracle could actually happen. The winter months passed slowly as Martha's belly began to swell with their growing child. Preston was true to his word, insisting that she rest often and taking on the bulk of the physical labor around the ranch. Charlie Dawson, fully recovered from his broken leg, came by frequently to help with the heavier work, and Emma brought her children to visit, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes that her own little ones had outgrown. Martha made the journey to Tucson once a month to see Dr. Harrington, and each time he assured her that the pregnancy was progressing normally, that the baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. Slowly, carefully, Martha allowed herself to believe that this was really happening, that she was going to be a mother after all these years of longing. She and Preston spent their evenings planning for the baby, discussing names and building a cradle from smooth pine wood. Preston painted the second bedroom a cheerful yellow, saying that it would work for either a boy or a girl, and Martha sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her needle flying as she created a layette for their child. As spring arrived and the desert burst into bloom with colorful wildflowers, Martha's belly grew round and prominent. She felt the baby move for the first time in April, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp with wonder, and Preston spent hours with his hand on her stomach, waiting to feel the kicks and punches of their active child. "He is going to be a fighter," Preston said one evening, as a particularly strong kick made Martha wince. "Or she is. Either way, this baby has your spirit. Or your stubbornness," Martha teased. But her heart was full of love for this man who had given her so much more than she had ever dreamed possible. The last weeks of her pregnancy were uncomfortable as the late May heat settled over the desert. Martha felt huge and ungainly. Her back ached constantly, and she could barely sleep more than an hour or two at a time. Dr. Harrington had told her the baby could come any time after the middle of May, and as June arrived with no signs of labor, Martha grew increasingly impatient. "This child is as stubborn as both of us combined," she complained to Preston one evening as she tried to find a comfortable position on the porch swing. "I think he or she plans to stay in there forever." Preston rubbed her aching back with patient hands. "The baby will come when the time is right," he said. "Try to enjoy these last days of peace before our lives become wonderfully chaotic." Martha laughed despite her discomfort. "I cannot imagine our lives being any more chaotic than they already are." She was wrong. Her labor started 3 days later, in the early hours of a June morning. The first pain woke her from a restless sleep, a tightening across her belly that was unlike anything she had felt before. She lay still for a moment, hand on her stomach, wondering if this was finally it. When the second pain came 15 minutes later, she knew. "Preston," she said, shaking her husband awake, "it is time." Preston came instantly alert, all the carefully laid plans flying out of his head in the face of the moment actually arriving. "Now? Right now? Should I ride for the doctor? Should I boil water? What do I do?" His panic was so genuine that Martha had to smile, despite the discomfort of another contraction. "First, you breathe," she said. "Then you help me walk around. The baby will not be here for hours yet, but we should send word to Emma. She promised to come help when my time came." Preston helped her out of bed, and they spent the early morning hours walking slowly around their house, timing contractions, and trying to stay calm. Preston rode to the Dawson place at dawn and returned with Emma, who took one look at Martha and nodded approvingly. "You are doing fine," Emma said, her voice calm and experienced. "This is going to take a while, especially for a first baby, but everything looks normal. Preston, why do not you make yourself useful and get that water boiling? We are going to need lots of it." The day passed in a haze of increasing pain and effort. Emma was a calm and reassuring presence, guiding Martha through each contraction, encouraging her when she felt she could not continue. Preston stayed close, holding Martha's hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and looking like he might faint every time she cried out. "I cannot do this," Martha gasped during a particularly intense contraction in the late afternoon. "It hurts too much. Something must be wrong." "Nothing is wrong," Emma said firmly. "This is how it is supposed to be. You are doing beautifully, Martha. The baby is coming, and soon you will hold your child in your arms. Just a little while longer." As the sun began to set, painting the sky outside their window in shades of gold and crimson, Martha felt the overwhelming urge to push. Emma checked her and smiled. "It is time," she said. "On the next contraction, push as hard as you can." Martha pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed, Preston supporting her from behind, his voice in her ear telling her how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. The pain was like nothing she had ever experienced, all-consuming and terrible, but underneath it was a fierce determination. She had been told this was impossible, and she was going to prove them all wrong. With a final monumental effort and a cry that surely echoed across the desert, Martha felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of breathless silence, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard filled the room, the lusty, indignant wail of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Emma announced, her voice choked with emotion as she lifted the squalling infant. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed the baby on Martha's chest, and Martha looked down at her son through a blur of tears. He was red-faced and wrinkled, covered in vernix and blood, and absolutely perfect. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny flailing fists, and when he opened his eyes, Martha saw they were blue like Preston's. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Hello, my miracle baby." Preston was crying openly, his arms around both Martha and their son, his face buried in Martha's hair. "You did it," he kept saying. "You did it, my love. Look at him. Look at our boy." Emma cleaned the baby and attended to Martha with efficient, gentle hands, and then she stepped back to give the new family privacy. "I will be in the other room if you need me," she said softly. "Congratulations, you two. He is perfect." When they were alone, Preston carefully took the baby from Martha's arms, holding his son with a reverence that made Martha's heart overflow. The tiny boy had quieted, his eyes open and alert, and he seemed to study his father's face with serious concentration. Preston was smiling, that wide, genuine smile that Martha loved so much. And as he looked from his son to his wife, his eyes were full of love and wonder and joy. "They told you that you were too old for children," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But here you are, the strongest, most incredible woman I have ever known, and here he is, our son. They were wrong about you, Martha, so very wrong." The cowboy held their baby and smiled, and Martha knew that she had finally found her home, her family, her forever. All the pain and disappointment of the past had led her to this moment, to this man, to this child, and she would not change a single step of the journey. The weeks following their son's birth passed in a haze of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Martha had never been happier. They named the baby Peter, after Preston's father, and he was a vigorous, healthy infant with a strong set of lungs and an appetite that kept Martha constantly exhausted but filled with joy. Preston was a devoted father, waking with Martha for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding Peter and marveling at every tiny finger and toe. He sang to the baby in a surprisingly tuneful voice, old cowboy songs and lullabies that his own mother had sung to him, and Peter seemed to find comfort in the sound of his father's voice. Emma visited frequently, bringing food and offering advice, and she taught Martha all the practical aspects of caring for a newborn that she had never experienced. The women of Agua Caliente, who had watched Martha's pregnancy with interest and not a little amazement given her age, showered the new family with gifts and well wishes. Even the ranch hands from the Triple Bar stopped by to congratulate Preston and sneak peeks at the newest member of their extended ranch family. Dr. Harrington made the journey from Tucson to check on Martha and Peter 6 weeks after the birth. He examined both mother and child thoroughly and pronounced them in excellent health. "I must admit, Mrs. Rourke, I am impressed," he said as he packed up his medical bag. "Not only did you carry to term, but you delivered a large, healthy baby with no complications. Your recovery has been textbook perfect. You have proven that age is not always the barrier we physicians sometimes believe it to be." Martha felt a fierce pride at his words. She had proven the doubters wrong, proven that her body was capable of this miracle after all. But more than that, she had proven to herself that it was never too late for new beginnings, for second chances, for the life she had always dreamed of having. As summer deepened and Peter grew stronger and more alert, Martha and Preston settled into the rhythms of family life. The ranch work continued, but they adapted it around their son's needs, taking turns caring for him while the other worked. Peter proved to be a good baby, sleeping in longer stretches as he grew, and his smiles and coos became the highlight of every day. One evening in late July, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset with Peter sleeping peacefully in Martha's arms, Preston turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about expanding the ranch, bringing in more cattle. We have been doing well, and with careful management, we could build something substantial to pass on to Peter someday." Martha looked at their son's sleeping face, so peaceful and innocent, and felt her heart swell with love and purpose. "That sounds like a wonderful plan," she said. "Build something that will last, something that will give him opportunities and a legacy." Preston took her free hand in his, linking their fingers together. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said quietly. "I had dreams, sure, but the reality is so much better than anything I imagined. You and Peter, this life we are building together, it is everything I never knew I needed." "It is everything I was told I could never have," Martha replied, her voice equally soft. "And yet, here we are. Proof that sometimes the impossible happens, that sometimes prayers are answered in ways we do not expect, at times we do not anticipate." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, their son sleeping peacefully between them, and Martha felt complete in a way she had never felt before. The doctors had been wrong, her ex-husband had been wrong, and everyone who had ever pitied her or written her off as too old or too damaged had been wrong. She had found love with a good man, given birth to a beautiful child, and built a life that was rich with purpose and joy. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple pleasures. The ranch grew and prospered under Preston and Martha's careful management, and Peter grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He learned to walk in the dusty yard of their ranch, took his first ride on a horse seated in front of Preston, and followed his parents around constantly, chattering in his childish voice about everything he observed. When Peter was 3 years old, Martha began to recognize familiar signs in her body once more. The fatigue, the morning nausea, the missed courses. This time, she did not wait to tell Preston, and this time, she was not afraid. They had done this once, and they could do it again. "Another baby?" Preston said when she told him, his face lighting up with delight. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing the doctor," Martha replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. "I thought Peter might enjoy having a brother or sister." This pregnancy was easier than the first in some ways, harder in others. Martha was 42 now, and she felt the physical strain more acutely. But she also had experience on her side, and the confidence that came from having successfully carried and delivered Peter. She took care of herself, rested when she needed to, and watched her body change once more with wonder rather than fear. Their daughter was born on a cool April morning in 1887, entering the world with less drama than her brother, but with just as much vigor. She had Martha's dark hair and a rosebud mouth that pursed adorably when she slept. They named her Margaret Rose, called her Maggie from the first day, and Peter was instantly smitten with his baby sister. "She is so tiny," he whispered, peering at her with wide eyes as Martha held her. "Can I hold her, Mama?" Preston lifted Peter onto the bed beside Martha, and together they helped him support Maggie's head as he cradled his sister carefully. The look of pure love and wonder on her son's face made Martha's eyes fill with tears, and when she glanced at Preston, she saw that he was equally moved. "Two children," Preston said later, after Peter had been sent to play and Maggie was nursing contentedly. "Two miracles. How did we get so blessed?" "I do not know," Martha replied honestly, "but I am grateful every single day. Life with two children was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Peter was an energetic 4-year-old who wanted to help with everything, and Maggie was a placid baby who seemed content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. The ranch continued to thrive, and Preston hired additional help so that he could spend more time with his growing family. Charlie and Emma Dawson became like family, their children playing with Peter and Maggie whenever they visited. The bonds forged that night in the desert when Martha had set Charlie's broken leg had deepened into true friendship, and the two families supported each other through the joys and challenges of ranch life. When Maggie was 2 years old, Martha turned 44 and took stock of her life with deep satisfaction. She had a husband she loved more with each passing year, 2 healthy children who brought her endless joy, and a home that she had helped build with her own hands and sweat. The general store owner from St. Louis, who had been told she was too old and too broken, seemed like a different person entirely, someone from a life that felt distant and unreal. She had not heard from her ex-husband in years, and she did not care to. He had his young wife and whatever children they might have had, and Martha had everything that truly mattered. She had proven that age was just a number, that doctors did not know everything, and that second chances could lead to happiness beyond imagining. The children grew, and the years passed, marked by the changing seasons of ranch life. Peter developed his father's talent with horses and his mother's practical nature, becoming indispensable around the ranch even as a young boy. Maggie was more dreamy and artistic, preferring to sketch the desert landscape in a book Martha bought her than to ride the range. But she had a way with the orphaned animals that invariably ended up at the ranch, nursing them back to health with gentle patience. Preston and Martha's partnership deepened with time, the initial passion of their courtship maturing into something richer and more substantial. They worked side by side, raising their children, building their ranch, and supporting each other through both triumphs and setbacks. When a drought hit in 1889 and they lost half their herd, they rebuilt together. When Peter broke his arm falling from a horse, they nursed him through it as a team. When Maggie came down with scarlet fever and Martha spent 3 sleepless nights at her bedside, Preston never left her side, holding her when she finally broke down in tears of relief as their daughter's fever broke. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Martha with a gift that brought her to tears. It was a painting commissioned from an artist in Tucson, showing their family, Preston and Martha, standing together, his arm around her waist, while Peter and Maggie played in the foreground. Behind them was their ranch house, and the vast desert sky stretched overhead, full of possibility. "So, we never forget where we started," Preston said as she stared at the painting. "And so, our children always know the story of how their parents found each other against all odds." Martha hung the painting in their main room, where it became the centerpiece of their home, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them to this place. She told Peter and Maggie the story often as they grew, how she had been told she could never have children, how their father had ridden into her life asking for help, how love had found them both when they least expected it. "So we are miracles?" Maggie asked when she was 6 years old, her dark eyes serious. "You are miracles," Martha confirmed, pulling her daughter close. "You and your brother both. But more than that, you are proof that hope and love can overcome what seems impossible." Peter, who was 9 and beginning to think himself too old for such sentimental talk, nevertheless moved closer to his mother. "Were you scared?" he asked, "when you were going to have me?" "Terrified," Martha admitted honestly, "but also hopeful. And your father was with me every step of the way, telling me everything would be all right. He was right, as it turned out." "I am always right," Preston said from the doorway, grinning at his family. "You are usually right," Martha corrected, laughing as Preston came to join them, pulling all 3 of them into his arms for an embrace that spoke of love and safety and home. The children continued to grow, and as they moved into their teenage years, Martha marveled at the people they were becoming. Peter was 17 now, tall and strong like his father, with a quiet confidence that served him well. He talked about taking over the ranch someday, about expanding their operation and bringing in new breeding stock. Maggie was 14, still artistic and dreamy, but developing a sharp wit and a talent for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's accounts. Martha was 52 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face lined from years of desert sun and hard work. She felt her age in her joints on cold mornings, in the way climbing into a saddle took a bit more effort than it used to. But she also felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money or property. She was rich in love, in family, in memories of a life well lived. Preston was 48, still lean and strong, though his brown hair had gone mostly gray. He still looked at Martha with the same intensity he had shown that first day when he rode into Agua Caliente asking for help, and she still felt her heart skip a beat when his blue eyes met hers across the dinner table, or the barn, or wherever they happened to be. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching yet another spectacular desert sunset. The children were inside, arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential, and she and Preston had stolen a few moments of peace. "Taking a chance on a woman who everyone said was too old, who could not give you what you wanted?" Preston turned to her with such genuine surprise that Martha almost laughed. "Regret you?" he said. "Regret our children? Regret this life? Martha, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me everything I wanted and things I did not even know to want. How could I possibly regret any of it?" "I just wonder sometimes if you think about the road not taken," Martha said. "If you had found a younger woman, you might have had more children, started a family sooner." "I found the right woman," Preston said firmly, taking her hand in his. "The timing was exactly as it should be. Everything that happened in both our lives before we met, all the pain and disappointment, it led us to each other. I would not change a single moment, because changing anything might mean we never met, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for nearly 15 years. "I love you," she said simply, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Preston replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Until my last breath, and probably beyond." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the evening star appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of their children's voices, raised in laughter about something, and Martha felt her heart swell with contentment. This was her life, built from the ashes of heartbreak and disappointment, rising like a phoenix into something beautiful and lasting. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes both large and small. Peter met a girl from Tucson at a dance when he was 20, a pretty young woman named Sarah with a quick smile and a practical nature that reminded Martha of herself at that age. They courted for a year before Peter asked Martha and Preston's blessing to propose, and the wedding took place on the ranch in the spring of 1897. Martha watched her son marry his sweetheart under an arbor Preston had built, decorated with desert wildflowers and white ribbons, and she cried happy tears at the sight of Peter's face as Sarah walked toward him. She thought about that night 20 years ago, when Preston had ridden into Agua Caliente, desperate for help, and how that single moment had led to all of this, to Peter, to Maggie, to the ranch, to this wedding, and the promise of grandchildren to come. Sarah proved to be an excellent addition to the family, and she and Peter built a small house on the far side of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work, but far enough to have their own space. When their first child was born, 10 months after the wedding, a squalling baby girl they named Emily, Martha held her granddaughter and marveled at the continuation of the miracle. She was 55 years old, a grandmother, and she had never imagined such happiness was possible. Maggie was 17 now and showing no inclination toward marriage, much more interested in her art and her books than in the young men who occasionally came calling. Martha did not push her, remembering her own late start at finding love, trusting that Maggie would find her path in her own time. "I am not in a hurry," Maggie told her mother when Martha gently inquired about her future plans. "I am watching you and Father, and I know what real love looks like. I am not going to settle for anything less." Martha hugged her daughter, proud of her wisdom and patience. "That is all I could ask for you," she said. "Take your time and choose wisely. The right person is worth waiting for." The ranch continued to prosper, now spread across 3 generations of Rourkes. Preston talked about retiring and letting Peter take over full management, but Martha knew he would never fully step away from the land he had built into something substantial. The work was in his blood, just as it had become part of her own identity over the years. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. Peter and Sarah were there with baby Emily and Sarah's growing belly that promised another grandchild. Maggie had baked a cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious. Charlie and Emma Dawson came with their grown children, and neighbors from surrounding ranches stopped by to offer congratulations. As the sun set and the party continued with music and laughter, Preston pulled Martha aside, leading her to their favorite spot on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. 20 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Martha added. Every day has been full, packed with so much living that it feels like we have fit a lifetime into these 2 decades. Several lifetimes, Preston agreed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, handing it to her with a shy smile that reminded her of the young cowboy who had asked her to marry him all those years ago. I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion. Martha opened the box to find a delicate silver locket on a chain. She opened it and gasped softly. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Peter and one of Maggie as children, their faces carefully captured by a photographer in Tucson. So you always carry them close to your heart, Preston said. The children we were told we could never have, the miracles that proved everyone wrong. Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she looked at her children's faces, preserved in silver and glass. Help me put it on, she asked, and Preston fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. She turned to face him, the locket resting against her heart, and she saw her own joy and gratitude reflected in his blue eyes. Thank you, she said, for everything. For taking a chance on me, for believing in me, for building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes, Preston replied, for being brave enough to marry a cowboy with more dreams than sense, for giving me a family and a home and a reason to be grateful every single day. They kissed as the sun finished setting behind them, their children and grandchildren and friends celebrating inside, and Martha thought about how far she had come from that woman standing outside a doctor's office in Agua Caliente, hearing once again that she was too old for children. That woman had been lost and heartbroken, but she had also been on the verge of the greatest adventure of her life, even though she did not know it yet. Sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them, Martha reflected. Sometimes hope survived even when it seemed foolish. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a cowboy rode into your life asking for help, and everything changed forever. The years that followed brought their share of joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Preston's health began to decline as he entered his 60s, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard ranch work. Martha nursed him through a difficult bout of pneumonia when he was 63, sitting at his bedside and refusing to let him give up, just as he had encouraged her through her first frightening pregnancy so many years before. Peter and Sarah gave them 4 grandchildren in total, 2 girls and 2 boys, and the ranch house was frequently filled with the noise and chaos of the younger generation. Maggie eventually did marry at the age of 25 to a school teacher from Tucson who loved her artistic nature and supported her passion for painting. They settled in town but visited the ranch often, and Maggie's husband proved to be a good man who treated her with the respect and love she deserved. Martha's own health remained remarkably good, well into her 60s, and she attributed it to the active ranch life and the love of her family. She still rose early most mornings to help with breakfast when the grandchildren were visiting, still rode her horse out to check on the cattle occasionally, still sat on the porch with Preston in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. We did all right, did we not? Preston said one evening when he was 65 and Martha was 62. They were watching the sunset once more, a ritual that had become as essential to their lives as breathing. Built something that will last, raised children who became good adults, created a legacy. We did better than all right, Martha said firmly. We built something extraordinary. Against all odds, we made a life worth living. Preston reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age and illness. I meant what I said 25 years ago, he told her. I look at you and thank God every single day that you said yes. And I thank God every day for a cowboy who rode into town asking for help, Martha replied, who saw past my age and my history to the person I could become, who gave me a family when I had given up hope of ever having one. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, their hands linked, their hearts bound together by a quarter-century of love and partnership. Inside the house, they could hear the sound of their grandchildren playing and the murmur of Peter and Maggie's voices as they talked with their respective spouses. This was the legacy, Martha thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the house, but the love that had created it all and continued to sustain it. Preston lived to see his 70th birthday, a milestone celebrated with a huge gathering of family and friends at the ranch. He was frailer now, his movements slower, but his mind was sharp and his love for Martha as strong as ever. She cared for him tenderly during his final years, returning the devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October night in 1913, surrounded by family, Martha held his hand and whispered words of love until his last breath left his body. She grieved deeply, the loss of her partner and best friend, leaving a hole in her heart that would never fully heal. But she did not regret a single moment of their time together, not one day of the extraordinary life they had built from impossible beginnings. Martha lived on at the ranch for another decade, watching her grandchildren grow into adults and her great-grandchildren arrive to add another generation to the family story. Peter ran the ranch with his oldest son, expanding it further and making it one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. Maggie's art gained recognition, her paintings of desert landscapes selling in galleries as far away as San Francisco. On Martha's 75th birthday in 1920, the family gathered once more for a celebration. She sat in a chair of honor that Peter had built specially for the occasion, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she looked around at all the faces that shared her blood and Preston's, all the lives that had sprung from a love that everyone said was impossible. "Tell us the story, grandmother," one of her great-grandchildren asked, a little girl of perhaps 5, with Maggie's dark hair and Preston's blue eyes. "Tell us about how you and grandfather met." Martha smiled, her voice still strong despite her age, and she began the tale she had told so many times over the years. She spoke of the doctor's office and the diagnosis that had seemed like the end of hope. She spoke of a cowboy riding hard into Agua Caliente, desperate to save his friend's life. She spoke of a night in the desert under the stars, and a marriage proposal given too soon by any reasonable standard, but exactly on time according to the heart. "And were you scared?" the little girl asked when Martha reached the part about discovering she was pregnant at 38. "Terrified," Martha admitted, just as she had told her own children years before. "But also hopeful, because sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, and sometimes the doctors are wrong, and sometimes cowboys ride into our lives and change everything." She fingered the silver locket that still hung around her neck, now containing photographs of all her children and some of her grandchildren as well. The chain lengthened to accommodate the additional photos Preston had added over the years. Inside was the story of her life, captured in faces and smiles, and the love that bound them all together. "Your grandfather held you when you were just a baby," Martha told the assembled family, her eyes moving from face to face. "And he smiled. He smiled because you were proof that the impossible could happen, that love could create miracles, that a woman told she was too old for children could build a family that would span generations." She looked around at all of them, these beautiful people who carried Preston's legacy and her own, and she felt profound gratitude for every struggle that had brought her to that moment. The pain of her first marriage, the loneliness of divorce, the repeated rejections from doctors who thought they knew what her body could and could not do, all of it had been necessary to bring her to Agua Caliente on that August day in 1883, to put her in the path of a cowboy who needed help, and ended up giving her everything she had ever wanted. Martha Freeman Rourke lived to see her 80th birthday, surrounded by love and family until the very end. When she passed away peacefully in 1925, she was laid to rest beside Preston on a hill overlooking their ranch, where the desert stretched out forever, and the sunsets painted the sky in colors that defied description. On her gravestone, Peter had inscribed the words that summed up her extraordinary life. They told her she was too old for children. She proved them wrong and built a legacy of love that will endure forever. And in the ranch house that still stood strong after more than 4 decades, in the faces of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried her blood and Preston's, in the land they had nurtured and the love they had shared, Martha's story continued. A story of hope against despair, of love against impossibility, of a cowboy who held their baby and smiled because miracles do happen, even in the harsh and beautiful desert of Arizona, even for those told that their dreams could never come true. The Rourke Ranch continued to thrive for generations to come, each one adding to the story that Martha and Preston had begun. And always, in the main room of whatever house stood on that land, hung the painting Preston had commissioned for their 10th anniversary, showing a family that should never have existed according to the wisdom of doctors, but that flourished anyway because two people believed in each other and in the possibility of hope. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. A story of the Wild West, of hard work and harder choices, of desert sunsets and impossible dreams come true. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, proving that it is never too late for new beginnings, and that the best adventures often start with a cowboy riding into town, asking for help, and a woman brave enough to say yes to the unknown.